All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to dive right into what is cost share. And we thought a really good place to start, particularly for maybe some of our financial colleagues or just folks that like a visual here, is really thinking through what are the key components of a project? What are those costs? So we have in this first column here, the direct cost paid for by the sponsor. And we have the indirect costs paid for by the sponsor. Those are costs that you're going to incur on the project, and you are going to go ahead and request reimbursement for, or what the sponsor is going to directly pay for. Then in that next column, what we have is direct costs. They're not paid for by the sponsor. So we're going to get into who else is paying for it. The sponsor's not paying for it. Who could it possibly be? So we're going to get into that in the next couple of slides. But that would be a cost share component. It's an opportunity for perhaps the institution to be paying for that, or maybe we have another third party that is contributing in some way, shape, or form. And when we add both the costs paid for by the sponsor and not paid for by the sponsor, what we have are the total project direct costs and the total project indirect costs. And then when we put those together, we have the total project cost. So what it really costs to do the work. So as we navigate to the next slide, what we have here is, the definition of cost sharing. Any project cost that is not reimbursed by the sponsor to support the scope of work defined by the federal or non-federal award. So in that last slide that we had with the graphic, that was that second column. Any kind of those costs, again, not reimbursed for or paid for by the sponsor. And what does the uniform guidance say about this? And so it's critical that, if we're laying the foundation here, we really get into, well, what is required based on the uniform guidance? So what are the parameters that we have? So our next slide gets into some of that definition. And so with that, some of the requirements for cost sharing. So it must be verifiable from the recipient's records, has to be documented in some way, shape, or form. We're going to be talking about this particularly as we get into some of the case studies. We're going to be talking about ways in which some institutions track this, but the point of this is if you're unable to track this in some way, shape, or form, then it's hard to demonstrate, pretty much almost impossible to demonstrate that you actually have met the cost share contribution. And so you have to be documenting that. It can't be included as a contribution from another federal program. So the federal government only wants to pay for it once, essentially. The third bullet here is that it has to be necessary and allowable under cost principles. So if you're going to count a cost share expenditure towards a federal project, then it has to be allowable, or what the federal government would reimburse you for on their own. And so it's critical to perform the cost allowability analysis on cost share expenses as well. As we mentioned, it can't be paid for by a federal award, and so you might have another non-federal award contribute towards this, and it also must be approved in the budget. Okay, you may be able to meet cost share requirements with direct or indirect, but it has to be clearly outlined at the onset to make sure that the sponsor's in line and everyone's in agreement what will qualify. Okay, so moving forward here, there's a bunch of different types of cost sharing as well. So we have mandatory committed cost sharing, and this is something that is going to be a condition of the award. It's going to be required, must be tracked, may require reporting, typically will require reporting. And if it's required by the sponsor, it must be included within the proposal. As you all may remember, a number of years ago when the Uniform Guidance revision came out, they said that any cost sharing would need to have been included within the proposal. The NSF also came out with that as well a number of years ago. And so I think we see that happening for the most part, but I'm sure Erin and Jeff, you have identified some cases where maybe some non-explicit cost share sneaks through the cracks. I think we can probably talk about that a little bit as well as we get into it. Voluntary committed cost share is something that you have pledged as the institution to cover a cost that you have committed to cover during the award, and that's something that you've put into the proposal. In some way it's quantified, and if it gets in the proposal and if it gets approved, then you have bound yourself to doing that, and it must be tracked, and it may require some reporting. You may have some voluntary uncommitted cost sharing, which is something you didn't intend to do, you didn't commit to do, but you're covering some aspect of the cost of it. And so thinking through whether or not your institutional policy requires that to be tracked, but it likely does not need to be reported, but always make sure that you understand the tracking and reporting requirements as you go through. Then we have an unallowable direct expense to a project no matter what, but that's the over the cap salary. And this is something that is also an expense that is borne by the institution typically for salary that exceeds the cap. Okay. And then we have sources that we're going to talk through. We have institutional funds that we'll cover. So, Erin works for University of Buffalo, Jeff works for Caltech. If their institution is funding a piece of the project, then those funds are coming directly from University of Buffalo or Caltech. You might have other sponsored funds, like we mentioned, wouldn't be a federal source. Maybe it's a non-federal source in some way, or some other match that you have at the institution. You may have in-kind, which could be a donation from a third party. Perhaps it's books or food or some sort of supply that the research project or the sponsored project benefits from. And you may also include your friends and subrecipients in meeting your cost share obligation.